then when it was time to graduate, you have to, for the MFA program, you have to turn in a thesis, which is a book-length work, and I was going to turn in a book of poems. And I got this hilarious letter from the accountants at the university that said, "Dear Mr. King, you know, because you got your fellowships from the fiction budget, you're required to turn in a work of fiction." And I thought that was ridiculous. I threw the letter away. And then I got another letter, and I took it to Lucy. And Lucy is very motherly, and she said, "Oh, don't worry about this, dear. I'll make it go away." And then I had become friendly with Michael Cunningham at that point, who had just won the Pulitzer Prize for the Hours, and I asked him to say something on my behalf. And I think he wrote a note that essentially said, you know, let the guy write his poems or something. I don't think it was an elaborate thing. But anyway, the university was not moved. You know, they said that I had to write a book of fiction. So I went back to this thing which nobody had liked, but I liked it. And my first idea was, all right, I'll outfox them. I'll make it a novel in verse. And so I wrote about 80 pages. I think I may have had most of the first draft at that point. The chronology is a little foggy. I'm not great with that, but I had a substantial part of the manuscript, and I thought, well, I'll write it as a novel in verse. So I wrote about 80 pages in iambic pentameter before realizing that, you know, I'm not exactly Milton, and it wasn't good. You know, it really wasn't good. It was like, it sort of went like da-doink, 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 da-doink. And so then I thought, okay, this isn't working. But one thing that happened from that exercise was that the language, and this is, I think, your third question, the language, because I'm not really a bad poet. I'm not up to writing, you know, 300 pages in verse, but I'm an okay poet. And the language, through that process, had become more sophisticated. It had become more polysyllabic and more interesting and more rhythmic. And I liked what had happened with that experiment. So I put it back into prose, but I kind of tried to keep that kind of language, the sophisticated language, for Howard's internal monologue. And then at one point I became very disillusioned with that, and I put that version aside, and I rewrote the entire book. I said, okay, he's a Midwesterner, he's very nuts and bolts, and, you know, he should kind of speak the way people that I grew up with in Ohio speak. So I wrote a version of it that was kind of all words of 1 and 2 syllables. And I finished that, and I thought, this is great. You know, I've achieved it. And I sat down to read it, and I was horrified because it wasn't interesting. You know, the language was not fun. It didn't have any pizzazz or anything. So the ultimate version was kind of a combination of those two impulses. And I think that's really what I do well as a writer. It was an important discovery for me to realize that one of the things I love to do is to move somewhat fluidly from a kind of high sophisticated diction to a much more demotic or even a pop cultural kind of way of speaking. And I think that's one of the things that makes Howard's monologue work, is that, you know, he can be very blunt and very straightforward and, you know, candid, and then he can also be quite sophisticated. And it really was the process of doing all those drafts and trying things out, and of course at the same time, you know, as I think probably many of you have figured out, learning to be a novelist and learning to be a novelist of that particular book. Let me say one more thing about, and if I'm talking too much, just, you know, like go like that or something. You know, one of the things, so occasionally, you know, I've been lucky with this book and people tend to like it, but occasionally people have said, you know, if this guy doesn't have language, you know, how can the text exist? And my thoughts about that are that, on some level, this is what fiction does. Not every novel that we pick up is presented as a text composed by the characters. But I realized in the process of looking at these two versions, the kind of sophisticated version that had come out of the poetry and the more blunt version that came out of my life in Ohio, I realized that the goal of the internal monologue was to capture his thoughts as specifically and precisely as possible. And I realized that the only tool I had to do that was to use the language as carefully as I could. And so that's kind of my justification for that.
So to a large extent, then the revision process was trying different voices.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you mentioned, Richard, in your questions was, did I add incidents and take them out?
Right.
I honestly don't recall that too much. I mean, the part of the book I'm most proud of is the third section, which is, I think, the darkest. It's the section where he wakes up in the oh geez, where the hell is he? I think he's in the hospital, right? Or is he in jail? He's in the hospital. Sorry. I wrote a couple screenplays for it and changed the plot. So I've sort of forgotten what's in the book and what's in other projects. He wakes up in the hospital, and you finally learn about his rehab process and then his depression and his suicide attempt and his recovery. And that for me, that's the part of the book that I'm most proud of. And I think that one of the things I may have done in various drafts was to find ways to deepen that, to enrich the hospital section. And also there's a part on his last night where he kind of makes 3 fatal stops. He goes to try to buy drugs, and then he finds Timothy, and Timothy runs away from him and is hit by the car, and then he goes to the convent and tries to kill himself. And I think that sort of triad of journeys, that little 3-part journey was a fairly late addition. I had the idea that he would go back through the dark side of his past on his way to the convent and then up there, and that was what I was going for.
The use of present tense works very well here. I think it seems appropriate the way that this guy is living. Did you experiment with that, or was that always a feature?
I think I put it in past tense for like a minute. It needed to be immediate because it really is a record of his thoughts. It's not something that I, particularly love, although I do love the way Updike does it in the Rabbit novels. I think it's really beautiful the way he handles it. But it can feel very divisive, and I was worried about that. But I also felt that I needed the immediacy of the first-person present tense.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about the MFA? If I understand correctly, you entered the program at a later age than most.
I think I was 40 or 42 or something like that.
Would you recommend that, and what led you to choose MFA?
I had a funny experience. I was working in the decor industry, and I was very frustrated. I think I learned what Thoreau meant when he said most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And so I began, one night I was sitting alone at a little pizzeria on Avenue A, and I started writing something, a memoir of a very comical time. When I was a kid, I ran away from home with the idea of going to Japan, and I made it as far as Kodiak, Alaska. And it's sort of a ridiculous narrative of clueless stoner suburban kids, out in the world, bungling everything. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll just write that up. That'll give me a creative project. But it was really hard. And I realized I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to do it. So I took a writing class, and then I took another class. And when I was still painting murals, this was one of the things that I really liked. My writing class became very important to me. And I was lucky to study with some wonderful people. I studied with Nahid Rockland, the Iranian novelist, and with Amy Hempel, who was not as celebrated now as she is then as she is now, and with a New York writer who I think I really admired called Melvin Bouquet. And Melvin and I became friends, and he used to come downtown, and we'd hang around the rock clubs together and like get wasted, and then he'd go back up to, he had a kind of perfect wife and 3 perfect children, and go back up to his perfect life. But he'd like to come down to the village and get down and dirty for an evening. And one night he called me up and he said, I was thinking about you the other day, and I realized you're wasting your life. Yeah, exactly. I said, what kind of a thing is that to say to me? And he said, well, I would feel bad if I didn't tell you that. But you have a business, and you're I think you're probably a very responsible and decent boss, and you pay your taxes on time, and in the evenings you write, and on the weekends you write, and that's all very well and good. But I think if you're on your deathbed and you haven't published a book, you're going to feel that you have not used your time well. And he said something which was also, which was very, very true, which was that when I came to New York, I wanted to be an artist, and for my first 15 or so years in New York, I supported myself. I prioritized art making and supported myself, by driving a cab or delivering flowers or tending bar, or, I did a bunch of stuff. And at some point after I started this company that painted murals, I had reversed that equation. And so I had begun making a living and then fitting the art in the crevices around it. And he said, well, you have to reverse that equation again. And I said, well, how do I do that? And he said, I think you should get an MFA. He said, Amy and I both went to Columbia and we liked it, and we'll both write you recommendations. And if you don't get into Columbia, you should apply to City College and NYU and Sarah Lawrence and blah, 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 and just apply. And so I did. And it was a really, really generous and kind move, despite how painful it was. I don't know whether I quite have the courage to judge my friends' lives that harshly and then to tell them about it. I can judge, but that was how I went to the MFA program. And it had never occurred to me that it was an option until Melvin sort of said, you're wasting your life. You asked me if I would recommend it. I think an MFA is a good idea. I teach now at NYU, and I often have students who want to go right into MFA programs from undergraduate school, and I think that's a terrible idea. I do think an MFA is a good idea, and there was a certain solidarity among those of us who went late in life or later in life. I wasn't the oldest guy in the program. But I do think, I tell my students at least wait a year and preferably 3 or 4, I just saw at the MFA program up here, I saw so many gifted people who had come out of, Yale or Princeton or whatever, just flounder around because they didn't, they didn't really have anything to write about except school.
Can we shift to the more towards the business of writing?
Yeah, I'm not going to be that helpful there, but I will do my best.
Well, tell us how you got your agent, though.
I'm on my 5th agent, and I think I got all of them by accident. I was sitting on a train. I had submitted some stories to the New Yorker, and had gotten a very nice rejection letter back. And I was sitting on a train talking to this guy going upstate, and we got off at the same stop, and I said, oh, well, if we should stay in touch. This has been nice. I'm Dave King. And he said, oh, you're Dave King. And I said, yeah, but I'm not. I mean, there are a lot of people with my name. I'm one of the unknowns. And he said, well, didn't you just have some stories accepted by the New Yorker? And I said, no, I had stories rejected by the New Yorker. And he said, well, I'm a literary agent, and I had heard about you through the grapevine, and so I'd like to, we should talk. So he became my first agent, and he was very supportive and wonderful. And he handled my first novel, which did not get published, but, had a good shot. And then he died. And I was with his assistant, and his assistant called me up and said, you don't have to stay with the agency if you don't want to. And I said, well, what brings that to mind? And he said, well, I value your friendship, and I would hate to have business come between us. What if I screw up selling your book? And I said, well, how about if you don't screw it up? And he said, well, who knows? Maybe I will. So I said, okay, I'm out. I need someone who has a little more confidence. So then I was without an agent for a long time, and a wonderful friend of mine, really one of my closest writer friends, who also was at Columbia with me, a guy called Alec Michaud, had an agent, and I had sent him my manuscript to get his thoughts, and he forwarded it to his agent without telling me. And she called me up and said, I'd like to talk about your book. And I said, how did you get my book? And she said, well, Alex showed it to me. I was really cranky. I was in the middle. I was struggling with something, and I said, that book that's not ready to go out yet. And she said, well, would you calm down? This is a literary agent calling up asking to represent you. So we met, and I liked her, and she was the one who handled the haha, and she did a wonderful job. But then she called me up one day, and she said, I realized that that I'm not making enough money as an agent, and I thought about your book. Your book was my biggest success, and it reminded me that the other thing I'm interested in is brain function. So I'm going to go to medical school and become a neurologist, which she has now done. And so for a while I was with her boss, who is a very, very big name agent, and I was the small fish in that pond, and was not happy there. And then I met a woman at a party who liked my work and wanted to represent me, so she's handling my current project.
I don't think that's a path many of us will be able to emulate.
Just be open to it. Like, talk to people, be friendly, put yourself out there, I think that's...
Talk to people on trains?
Yeah.
I hate to drive someone into neurosurgery.
She was a wonderful agent. She was really a very, very brilliant girl, an astonishingly brilliant girl. She'd done, English, a double major of English and physics or something at Princeton, and then she'd been a reporter at Rolling Stone, and then she decided to do agenting, and then she became a neurologist. She's now doing a residency at Johns Hopkins. She's kind of scary, but she's wonderful. She's a lovely, lovely person.
Dave, you've given us some insight into your connection to poetry, but I've heard so many times writers say they rely on poetry for inspiration that I'd like to learn a little bit more about your experience with it, and why you say that you keep a copy of the Norton Anthology of Poetry at hand, even when you've turned off your internet connection.
Often what works for me, increasingly as I get older, what I struggle with is I know where I want to go, but I can't get there, and I can't figure out what the words are. But lots of times it's sort of what are the steps to get to create a quarrel between a father and a son, for example. What exactly did they blow up about? And sitting and staring at the screen doesn't do it for me. But I know that if I turn my attention elsewhere, my subconscious will continue to work on it, and something will hit me. Unfortunately, for some reason that I don't understand, that doesn't work if you're doing email or cruising blogs, or if you're on the internet. That for me, that doesn't work. But if I pick up a book, I mean, it's often a book of poetry, because poetry is kind of abstract and has a lot of holes, and it allows you're sort of like trying to stimulate your subconscious anyway with poetry. But it can be a story or a novel or something, and I'll be reading along, and as soon as I forget my novel, some word will jump out at me, like, abundance or health or something, and I'll think, oh, they fight about the father's health, or something like that, and it's just like a way of distracting your attention, and I think it's a device that a lot of people use. There's a writer that I'm friends with called Cynthia Carr, who wrote the biography a couple of years ago of the artist David Wojnarowicz, and she was the one who first suggested the whole Norton anthology thing to me. She said she keeps it next to her desk, and just when she needs a break, she'll open it at random, whether it's Donne or Bishop or whoever it is. She'll just read a little bit and see if something kind of explodes.
Can you recommend any books on craft?
Yeah, I teach at NYU. One of the classes I teach is an advanced fiction workshop, and in that one, every other week, the students read a work of fiction, but every other week, they read a short essay on craft. So the ones I use, I like Francine Prose's book, which is called Reading Like a Writer. I like the book by the New Yorker, what the hell is his name? Yeah.
How Fiction Works.
How Fiction Works, yeah. My friend Richard Cohen has a book coming out, I think in the spring, called How to Write Like Tolstoy, which I've read portions of, and I think it's very, very good. So those are sort of, for example, I like Francine on dialogue. I think her chapter on dialogue is really excellent, particularly because almost everybody says that dialogue should should reveal more than just what the people are talking about. But I think she demonstrates how various people handle that very nicely. With Wood, what chapters do I use with him? I'm trying to think.
The early ones, the later ones are all about writers.
Is that true? Okay. Yeah, I have them on PDFs. I think there's. Well, I can look them up. I have them on my laptop back there. I like Charles Baxter on subtext. And then there's one book which is not really about how to write, but it's how to endure the writing life, and that is the book called The Writing Life by Annie Dillard. I often give my students chapter 3, which is the one where she talks about just what hell it is being in a room with your manuscript, and sort of says, don't ever try this, it's too awful. And then the students, inevitably, there's half the students really get that, and then half the students come in and say, well, if she doesn't like it, why doesn't she just go off and do something else? But it's a very provocative chapter, and I think in other parts of the book, of course, she talks about the joys of writing life and of figuring things out and stuff like that. Do you want me to look up the Wood chapters that I use?
Sure.
Let me turn on my laptop.
How about Self-Editing for Fiction Writers by Rennie Brown and Dave King?
I have never met that guy. I feel haunted by him, but I'm haunted by a million people named Dave King. I get his fan mail, but
You're actually, because you use Dave, even in the Columbia alumni records, you're kind of a rarity.
that was the idea.
If you look up David King,
Yeah, tell me about
you
it.
don't, there's nobody, the David Kings who have Columbia degrees, and I check credentials. They're surgeons and teacher, do other things, but none of them are you. I had to find you as Dave King.
Yeah, and it kind of, the ones I use on, the chapters I use for Wood are the ones called Dialogue. There's one called Dialogue, there's one called Language, there's one called Narrating, and there's one called Truth, Convention, Realism. And I don't tend to give all four of those to every class, but I'll pick and choose depending on the chemistry of the class. But yeah, the Dave King problem, I mean, thanks, Mom, for giving me a boring name. There are a lot of us. And there's the one who's most in pop culture at the moment is a drummer with this jazz band called the Bad Plus. And like he's big and he's sexy and he's just like sort of better in a lot of ways. Younger. But I like the band and tend to always go see them when they play in New York, and the person at the gate always remarks on the fact that I have the same name.
Well, I have a question from a fan all the way from England.
Oh, okay.
She wants to know about a sequel. Would you consider writing a sequel? So Howard?
I don't think. I mean, there's a suggestion at the end of the book that he and Laurel will end up together. I'm not convinced that they will. I don't think Howard is any picnic to live with. My goal in writing the book was to leave every character a little bit better off than they were at the end of the book than they were at the beginning of the book, and I'm pretty satisfied with that. I don't know what I would do with a sequel. I mean, it could be that at some point when I'm, a very old man, it'll occur to me to write a sequel based on, Ryan or something like that. But I think, to my mind, this story is complete. Although, as I said, I've written a couple versions of a screenplay for it, and one is moving towards production, and it's somewhat different. It just seemed like the novel wasn't. It needed other things to be filmic.
Sure. If you're working on something different now, are you approaching it differently? What have you learned or changing with your next novel?
Well, after the Ha-Ha, I spent 10 years working on a book which is a reimagining of the myth of Cupid and Psyche, which is one reason I'm interested in your project. It really was a 10-year death march. It took too long. It was too hard. My father died in the middle of it, and we were very close, and I took that really very, very hard and lost kind of 2 years. And that novel has gone out to editors just recently, so I'm hoping that will find a publisher. And I have a new project, which is exciting. It started as a small work, and the Beast and Beauty, which is the project I just described, also started as a short story. Because I don't know if you know that the story of Cupid and Psyche and the story of Beauty and the Beast, Beauty and the Beast is essentially a retelling of Cupid and Psyche, and so the novel that I've just written kind of takes that a little further. And C.S. Lewis also wrote a retelling of it called Till We Had Faces. The new novel started as a novella, or as a pair of novellas that investigate the idea that when confronted with death, particularly the death of a loved one, we become more sexualized, and we seek out like sex as a kind of life force, as a kind of counteraction against mortality. And I had a great summer. I banged out 80 pages of it, which of the beginning, which I think are really pretty strong, and I'm feeling happy with it. And I was working on it this morning. Unfortunately, I'm back at school and now have less time to work on it. But that's what's in the works.
Mind if we open?
No, please.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question about, you were talking earlier about the way your character speaks, and I painted myself into a corner with a character who sort of, he speaks, it's in Calypso, right? So I'm from Trinidad, and when I was a kid, I'd make them up. It starts with like a poem.
You're from Trinidad?
Yeah.
Oh. Do you know Asa Wright, the Asa Wright Center?
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh,
I was there one time with my family.
Nice.
Anyway, go ahead.
Right, so I don't know why I committed to this, but it's taking me a lot of time to get, every time he comes up, it's a magical character.
Mm-hmm.
I want him to stand out because of the way he's speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I know how I used to make up calypsos as a kid. You know, you start with a poem and you put a little tune to it.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, did I set the bar too high? Have I made it too? Is it possible to make this character stand out without doing all of that? Did I ask myself to do too much?
I mean, it's hard for me to answer that without knowing exactly what you've done, but it sounds like an incredibly cool idea. You know, to have a character who comes on and speaks in Calypso language, that already seems like a really great and original mark of distinction. I would say then make sure that each time he comes out, that each of his little poems contribute something more to what you have to say about either, you know, his magicness or his authenticity or his individual personality or something like that. I mean, I think over the course of a novel, my guess would be that if there were a series of kind of Calypso, you know, verses, they're going to be constantly interesting for the reader and really a kind of nice little break for the reader. But they're going to be even better if there's a slight change. Like if we're going like, oh, look what the writer did with this one. Oh, look what she did this time out. Look what, you know, how's this one different? How's that one different? That one different.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Did you ever read the Vonnegut novel that has the Calypso songs in it? You read that? Was it God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater? I don't know if it is God Bless. I think it's the one with Ice Nine in it.
Cat's Cradle?
Maybe it's Cat's Cradle.
Cat's Cradle. A sleeping a lion tamer in the forest dark, and a sleeping junkie up in Central Park, and and a British queen. They all fit together in the same machine. Nice, very nice, very nice. But it's a kind of Calypso thing that it's presented as.
Right.
I think it may be Cat's Cradle.
Okay, I'll look for that.
But I mean, you know, it should be easy to find out. You know, I think if you do Vonnegut, it's not anything like what you're doing because you know he's a fabulist and stuff like that. But it is interesting that someone has utilized that.
Right. And I had a second question just to follow up on the recasting of plots, like why Sargasso Sea answering to Jane Eyre's The Master of the House, what's going on in the Caribbean with his real wife back there. Do you think that there's a hungry demand for that retelling of stories or that different angle of telling a story that has been around for a long time?
I think it's in the current moment. I really do. I kind of think that there are a lot of there are a certain number of books where it's kind of an excuse and it's not interestingly done.
Mm-hmm.
Like, ooh, let's tell the story of Hemingway from the point of view of Hadley, or you know, let's talk about the girl in the Vermeer painting, or you know, like let's describe this room from the point of view of this this water pitcher. You know, not all of those projects are equally interesting to me. But I think, for me, because my interest is in literature and storytelling and narrative and stuff like that, the stories that take something that is fundamental to our culture and recast us and force us to look differently at them, at the subject matter or the story itself, those are the interesting ones. I mean, I think your project sounds really interesting. And one of the reasons I like Wide Sargasso Sea is exactly what you said. You know, that it recasts the it's not just a gimmick, but it recasts the story of the master of the house in colonialist terms, which I think is really vital. I have and this is something you might be interested in. I have an advisee at NYU, a master's candidate, who is interested in science fiction and speculative fiction, but he's a guy from Singapore of Indian descent. So his grandparents came to Singapore, and he's a native of Singapore, but he has a strong identification with Indian culture. And he feels that only through speculative fiction and science fiction can he find the right vehicle for talking about colonialism in the way that he wants to. He says, and this is an idea he gets from Samuel R. Delany, who is one of the great science fiction writers alive today, that to talk about class and to talk about, the divisions among people, and I mean in Delany's case, gender and race and all. I don't think Manish is interested in talking about gender and race, but he's extremely interested in colonialism and in the domination of one culture over a subject culture. And I think he feels that by creating narratives about the colonization of other worlds, he can unpin that, he can palpate that idea a little more thoroughly than by just looking at the historical record.
Yeah. I have a question. I don't know if this is a question. I mean, I guess I was listening to you telling us how you met your agents, which is all very amazing, put it mildly. But if you have met an agent, or if you've met someone who says, I can put you in touch with whomever, and your work is not ready, you don't really, I mean, you may have a chapter, you don't have anything else. And the fellow who gave this, he gave a speech to the Bronx Council of the Arts, had put together something, and he was from a major place, literary place. He told us what to do. He also gave me the name of the agent who was the agent for Octavia Butler.
Oh, awesome.
But this was like almost 2 years ago. And wow. I kept the card and everything. But what I want to know is it proper, or is it any way that you can kind of like keep your name out there without having submitted anything? Remind someone, I met you at such and such. I'm still working on this. I'm just trying to figure out.
You mean with this fellow or with the agent?
Well, I would have to, I guess both. I've never met
I would
the agent.
certainly stay in touch with the guy.
He just gave me the card.
Yeah, I would definitely stay in send him a Christmas card, or like put yourself in his path. Find out what route he takes from home to the bus. Go along and go, wait a minute, I know you from somewhere. Did we go to high school together?
Oh, okay.
I would stay in touch with the guy.
Father's Day.
With the agent, I promise you cannot submit anything until it's your best work.
Right.
You only get one shot.
That's
it's like being a virgin.
He does the. I think he does the general. Like he's the one who pulls in the general manuscripts of people who are just coming in, and he parses them out. But and he at the time he was talking about the type of works that he was looking for, but he wasn't. He was like the front door. He wasn't the agents.
Yeah.
And so although I've seen him one more time at something else that they had at Bronx Council of the Arts, and I have his card. I never followed up, but now that I've decided I'm going to really pursue this, and I was sitting in the front row, I think you would remember me because I asked a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Is it all right to follow up, maybe just was a card, and note, hello, so-and-so, I'm still working, I remember I met you at such and such, and...
I think there are a couple things you can do. One is continue to go to those events. Like, go to all these events and check people up, learn the person sitting next to you, and make friends. You know, one of the things that I learned from Melvin, that conversation when he called me up and told me I was wasting my life, is you have to enter the literary community. You know, you're in the big four world, and you need to enter into the writing world. So go to those events, make friends. You're right to ask questions, to, like, you know, build on all of that stuff. I mean, I don't know. It depends on how comfortable you feel with saying to this guy, look, I'm just trying to, you know, cultivate a body of friends in the writing world. And if you want to get a cup of coffee at some point, I'd love to hear about your project. I mean, I don't know whether a woman feels comfortable saying that kind of thing to a man, or whether, you know, how that works. But it's the type of thing that I have done on occasion. And, you know, I would not say that it's ever led to something direct, but it's never turned into an embarrassment or you know, I mean, well, it's a way of making connections.
Just to follow up, like, since he has been there, the head of the writing program has changed. So I don't know if the new head has him as a connection with Olin did.
Yeah,
but I do want to, I still have his card, and I still remember very vividly, so I just wanted to make a connection. And I just wanted to make sure that made sense, and it seems to me that you're saying it does.
I think it does, and the other thing is that if he's the gatekeeper at a writing program, I'm sure he's working on something himself. You know, you can say, like, you know, I never asked you, are you working on a novel? What are you working on? People love it when you show interest in their work. You know, I mean, it's just, I don't think you have to be, like, craven or you know, manipulative about it. It's really just about being friendly. One of the things, you know, as I think maybe, Richard didn't really mention this, but maybe you know, I was at, my undergraduate degree was in painting and film, and I was a painter for 10 years before we started the mural company. And the art world is horrible. The art world is so mean and competitive, and, you know, everybody is defensive because there's a hell of a lot of money to be made. And, you know, they're all scrambling for a limited number of places in those galleries in Chelsea. You know, let's face it, in the writing world, there's not a lot of money to be made. And there aren't in the same way there aren't like a limited number of books get published every year. For that reason, the writing community is generally nice to each other. You know, writers are kind to each other. They know how hard it is to write even a bad book. You know, so writers are nice. Editors and publishers are generally courteous, even if, you know, they're overworked. I think you can reach out in a way and make friends in this community. And then, you know, like, you want to know who's really nice to each other, musicians and poets, because, you know, they have it completely bad in American culture of 2015.
So you don't think it's too late? A year and a half is not too late.
You know, if he says go to hell, then you got your answer.
Okay.
You know, but,
okay. And they still remember me.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I don't think there's any harm in trying.
Okay.
You know? I think it's always a good idea to reach out, like, in any circumstances. You know, there was a point, I was a very shy undergraduate, and there was a point when I was at a party, slowly getting drunk enough to engage the party, and I looked across the room, and my best friend was dancing to James Brown, and she was you know, using every muscle in her body, it seemed, and I had this, like, great visceral desire to be her instead of me. And I got up the next morning and I said, I'm going to conquer my shyness, and I'm going to start saying yes if anybody asks me a question. I'm just going to adopt a policy of yes rather than no. And it made all the difference.
You did?
Yeah, it really did. It really changed everything.
You changed yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, some of the things I said yes to were unwise, but psychologically, it was a growth exercise.
In readership that is post-Vietnam, are they understanding the Vietnam aspects of what you're writing, or does they just think this is ancient history, or how does it come across to them? Do you know?
I guess they like it. I mean, they don't, like, people don't really write to me to say, I hated your book, or I didn't get it, or anything like that. The people who write to me are people who I mean, I guess a lot of them, now that you mention it, it's funny because I never thought about this question before, so I don't have a canned answer. But I think a lot of people respond to the disability aspect, or they respond to the Vietnam aspect, or they respond to the idea of being, a stranger in one's own culture, or something like that. I mean, I know that many of my students have read the book and have liked it, and I have a collaborator that I wrote my screenplay with, who just turned 30, and he read it when it first came out and liked it. But who knows? One thing in the screenplay, one of the things that I think was problematic in the many screenplays that Warner Brothers commissioned for this thing was that they wanted to switch it to the Iraq War. And by the 21st century, the technology has emerged so that it's not really feasible that Howard would be as isolated as he needs to be for the book to happen. So in my screenplay, we moved it back to Vietnam.
Have you talked to vets about their experience?
I did a fair amount of research, but it didn't include talking to vets. I mean, I didn't really want to. I wasn't interested in creating a portrait of a particular vet. I thought quite a bit about the guy next door who babysat for me, and now has his name on the wall in DC, and other people that I've known. And I was the last year of the draft, and missed it by that much. So I've thought a fair amount about it, and I looked at there's so much on the web. There's great blogs and really heartfelt pieces of stuff that you can read. But in terms of imagining the character as a person, I just that wasn't part of the process for me. And I've been lucky in that the vets who've written to me have all said I got it right. But as you may have noticed, there's not a whole lot of Vietnam in the book. Oh, and you asked earlier about revisions. At one point, there was quite a bit more Vietnam, and then I decided to just. At one point, he was injured 16 days before he was going to get out of. Before he was going to fly home. And I realized that gave me almost a year of Vietnam stuff to invent. And I had a kind of brainstorm that if I made him be 16 days in, then it could be a much more condensed experience and maybe much more nightmarish. And so that's what I did. I mean, there were a lot of other scenes and hikes and camps and boot camp and stuff like that ultimately got thrown away. And I just condensed it to those 16 days, and essentially the three guys, the lieutenant and Rimmon. Yeah.
Do you write from an outline, or character arc, or plot arc? Do you think either do you have a written format you use, or do you keep something in your head, or does it just because of your artist background, your writing background, does it come to you naturally?
Once in a while. I mean, I usually try to start out without an outline. In these two novellas that I'm working on now, one of them I know the exact ending, and the other one I don't. And I don't think I really knew. I didn't have any sense of the ending of the Ha-Ha until like that morning. one of the things that I do, which I advise students to do, which I think is a good idea, is that once I have a draft, I make a reverse outline. In other words, I look at my 100 pages and I turn that into an outline, like one, opening scene, Howard arrives at what's her name's house. And I make a list of exactly what occurs, and it will go, it's a handwritten, it'll go pages and pages. But what that allows me to see is places where I've duplicated the certain events, or maybe several events can be condensed into one, or something like that. I find that really helpful. I don't know, I mean, the endings are tricky, and I don't know quite how to use an outline to get to the end of a story. But I think it's really helpful for organizing the events between the beginning and the end.
Did you ever write a synopsis for it? Were you ever required to, or no?
No.
So you didn't have that
I mean, I have like
positive
a
or
sort
negative
of
experience?
couple sentence thing that I wrote up when it was going to come out, which was, Howard Kapostash was injured 20 years earlier in a mine explosion in Vietnam. Now, over the course of the summer, various events occur that teach him what the war cost him. But that's like sort of a, I don't know, it's like an advertising slogan or something. I don't know that that's really useful.
It's a pitch.
Yeah, it's a pitch. It's a pitch.
Shifting to the end of the process, you sign a representation agreement with an agent. The agent shows it to publishers. I see your publisher is Little Brown.
Yeah, they're not going to be the publisher for the new book.
Can you talk a little bit about what interaction you have with either with the editor at Little Brown? Did they beat you up, and did they demand or suggest revisions? And once you made those revisions, either voluntarily or under duress, did they take their good old-fashioned time? Was that all opaque to you, or did your agent keep you involved? Did the editor keep you involved? What do you know about that side?
A little of each. I mean, I was very lucky with Little Brown. They were very good to me. I mean, one area where I was lucky was that the agent sent the book out, and there was a kind of scramble for it. There were several houses that were bidding on it, and all wanted it at once. And so, Little Brown sweetened the deal in a number of ways. And one of the things that they said was that they wouldn't force me to make any changes. And they also laid out a plan for promoting the book. They did promote the book heavily for a couple of weeks. It was, like one of the most reviewed books in America.
I see you got on the book club. You're
yeah.
book club.
Yeah.
The month club.
Yeah. They did a great job with that. They were really behind it. And Michael Peach, who's the publisher of Little Brown, was, lovely and gracious gentleman throughout. My editor was a young guy. I don't think he was terribly experienced, and I never understood whether there was somebody behind him saying, like, get Dave to do this, get Dave to do that. People in publishing liked him a lot. I didn't particularly hit it off with him. That may have been partly me. They didn't ask for a lot of editorial suggestions, but the day after I signed the contract, he called up and he said, well, you've probably been expecting this, but we're requesting a change. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, we want a different title. And I said, well, what was that whole thing about not asking for changes? And he said, well, we didn't mean the title. And so we went round and round, and he came up with some titles that were, I think, not great. And I came up with a lot of titles that were not great. And ultimately, they decided to go with Bahaha, which I'm attached to for a number of reasons. One is that I like the idea that for Howard, who really doesn't have language, that the ha-ha is a kind of just inarticulate sound. That it's initially confused, that it presents a kind of veil for the reader, and also that just as an actual ha-ha is a kind of optical illusion where, you know, you look at something and you don't really see what's there, I feel that that's the same. That's the one symbol. This is not a book that's rich in symbol, but that's the one symbol that the book contains. That, you know, like Howard, a ha-ha is something that is more complicated than it seems at first. But also, I just couldn't think of another title. I had this title for 7 years, and finally we agreed to keep it. I don't know if I would make that decision today. I think it's an okay title, but I might, with a little more distance, be able to exercise more imagination. And I am less attached to it. But that was the one thing. And then the marketing people at one point called up and asked me to make a more convincingly happy ending. And I really struggled with it and kind of couldn't come up with what the ending should be. And so they published it essentially as I wrote it. One of the things that has been really rewarding with so many people reading the book is that where Little Brown and their marketing team were uneasy about both the ending and the title, readers in general seem to have embraced both of them and seem to think it's kind of a provocative title and an interestingly oblique or ambiguous ending. And it's one of those things where just a lot of readers are smarter than marketers give them credit for. But in general, Little Brown was, they were lovely. They were very, they were not, they were very cagey about the cover design. I mean, they didn't want me involved in that at all. And actually, I brought some things to show you. So this was the original cover, which I think is really pretty, although one of the things that was very disturbing to me was that they had a small, the person on the tractor originally was a small blonde child. And I said, well, the kid in the book is African American. And my editor said, oh, nobody expects the cover to be literal. And I said, well, you can't, I'm going to look like a racist. You can't do that. So they kind of photoshopped it to make it look more like, I mean, I don't think that's Howard either, but at least it's not a small blonde child. I mean, should I pass these around? I mean, and then there's this one I guess you've all seen. And this one Ralph has. Did you see this? This is the cover that replaced the that one. And then this is the Italian version. I don't know why sneakers are such a big deal with this book. And then and this is the German version. Look how long German words are.
It's the same brand of sneakers.
Yeah.
This doesn't look. This doesn't look 120,000 words.
I think it is. Really? I think it is. I mean, I could look up on here and do a word count. The thing is, but I think it's 120,000.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, the type is kind of big, and there's a lot of air and stuff like that. But I don't know. And then I don't seem to have copies of the other foreign versions. What the heck is that? Oh, look.
Physically, what tools do you use? Pen and paper, typewriter?
Oh, you type on this thing.
What program?
I use, I guess, Microsoft Word. It's just what I'm familiar with.
You've been approached by somebody about Scrivener, so curious if anybody else uses that.
My friend Nalini Jones, who's a wonderful, has a beautiful collection called What You Call Winter, which is about Indian, a family in which the children are increasingly migrating away from Mumbai. She uses Scrivener, and she's been pushing me to use it. But the thing that she likes about it is that her stories are made up of, oh, there's a German one around somewhere, right? Do I have that? Oh, yeah. Her stories are made up of like chunks that she's really comfortable rearranging. I'll put those back in there until another 10 years pass. And she likes the fact that with Scrivener you can like just take a whole chunk and move it around, and you don't have to copy and paste or anything. And that's key to the way she works, which I think is a little different from the way I work. I'm happy with Microsoft Word. I mean, I recognize that, you know, corporations are evil and Microsoft is as evil as, you know, Google, but not as evil as, you know, Chase Bank, you know, but that's what I use, you know. I do not, however, have anything to do with Amazon whatsoever.
Okay.
If you want to know about evil.
Is that because of the recent revelations, or?
You know, I mean, part of it is that they're really, you know, I'm shocked at what they've done to damage publishing and the lives of working writers. But also, you know, the labor stuff. I mean, you know, I suppose I'm probably wearing a Banana Republic shirt, and it's probably made by people who are not paid well and stuff like that. So there's some inconsistency there, but. The labor revelations about Amazon really turned me off.
I just had a comment. When you said that the publisher said that people don't pay attention to
Can you imagine?
cover it made me think, if you go back to when you were a kid and you saw the comic books,
Mm-hmm.
there was a gorilla on every comic book, and you rushed to buy
Where's
the comic
gorilla?
book,
Yeah.
and there's no gorilla, and you know what, yeah. So I read an article that said that the publisher said they didn't know why. They just knew that they put a gorilla on the comic book, the kids would run to buy the comic books.
That's
Didn't
very
know
funny.
why, but that's what they did. It's like, yeah, we want to see a story about a gorilla.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It just made me think of that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Since you're a writer who thinks about the sound and the language of poetry, I'm curious to know once you've written something, do you ever read it out loud as you try to edit it and so on? Part of the reason I'm asking this is because this group has been invited to KGB bar and you know,
Yeah, sure.
and
Oh, you should do it.
And
But
you know, as I'm
you're there.
preparing, oh, great, yeah, it's actually head of month. We'll send you that.
2 Sundays from today.
Okay.
September
Yeah.
27th.
So as I'm preparing my piece, I'm reading it out loud, and it gives me a whole different perspective into the piece. And we had Richard Ford here a few months ago. He does the same thing. He reads every word out loud as he edits. I'm just wondering if you use a similar technique or find it useful.
I don't know that I always read them literally out loud, but I do. I mean, I do something like move my lips and, you know, listen to the sound. It's what Francine calls putting every word on trial for its life. You know, just hearing it again and again, and really trying to be aware of the sounds of the words. My advice when you read is to read much more slowly than you think you need to. The way you lose an audience is by rushing, and it's hard to hear. It's hard to hear the imagery and follow a plot, and also, like, you know, think about your beer and whether your bag is touching the lady next to you and stuff. It's hard to like do all that in a public space if the person is rushing along. So I would really advise reading slowly, and, you know, and absolutely practice before you do it. You know, that's essential. Good luck. I'm out of town on the 27th, so I'm sorry to miss it, but I hope it goes well. That was the first place I ever read, and it was a really fun experience.
The director there is has a Columbia MFA.
Yeah, it's Rebecca, right? Rebecca
Suzanne
Donner?
Dottino.
Oh, Suzanne's doing it now. Yeah. We were there together. I love Suzanne.
It's a nonfiction. She's a nonfiction MFA.
Yeah. No, we were pretty good friends there. I don't see her that much anymore, but we're in touch on Facebook and stuff like that.
It was Roshana who put KGB on our radar. She knew the place and told me about it, and it turned out to be everything she said it was.
I think my friend Melvin was one of the early investors. I think he and 3 friends took over the place and started to started it really as a place for writers and literature and a venue, you know, for students and established writers and all of these various things. I think it's a wonderful venue, and it did used to be apparently the office of the Communist Party, which is why it's called KGB.
No.
Yeah, that's why it's painted red and called KGB.
Oh my God.
It was the New York office of the Communist Party.
What a perfect place.
They have a thing there. They have a thing there called Drunken Careening Writers, which is run by a woman called, I think her name is, she's a sorry, sometimes I stammer, playwright. And I think her name is Kathleen Warnock, and she does a thing one Thursday a month, which is called Drunken Careening Writers, where everybody, she invites people particularly to read, you know, their raunchiest sex scenes or the most embarrassing, like, drugged and, you know, just screwed up scenes. And she invited me, and I read the dirty parts of my novel, and I didn't invite my students or anything, but some of them found out about it, and I was so shocked. I was teaching at Baruch at that time, and you know, the Baruch population is very diverse, and many of them are either immigrants or first-generation Americans, and they're conservative. And it was horrifying to me to walk into that room and see all of these, like, nice Russian Orthodox girls and Muslim guys and stuff like that who had shown up to support me while I read, like, the dirtiest bits of this book. It was really terrible.
Maybe we could get some signatures.
Yes, really,
Oh, yeah.
this has been wonderful. Thank
Oh,
you so
good,
much.
good. It's been a pleasure for me.
Really-
Let me turn this off because I've got to be on a train and I'm